Hey guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to Helldivers 2. Today I'm going to help you guys survive a little bit better against the bugs by giving you 3 really good builds to use against the Terminids. These are builds that I've been using myself on and off when fighting the Terminids, and they are a combination of really effective and in some cases really fun to use. So without further ado, let's get right into the video and talk about these 3 really good Terminid builds. So first, before going into talking about these builds, I want to mention something that I'm going to do when talking about them. A lot of the stuff that I'm using throughout all of these builds are things that are of course linked to premium war bonds, so things that some people just might not have access to. So when going through each of these builds, I will be giving some alternatives or replacements that you could use in lieu of the things that I actually have in the build if you are somebody who is a completely free-to-play player or does not get super credits or gets them very, very slowly because you just get them throughout the course of missions. So I will try to give some free-to-play alternatives to some of the gear that I'm using if it is applicable. In some cases, some of the gear is just incredibly needed or required for the build to function, but I will try to give some alternatives if it is applicable. So the first build I have for you guys is what I have dubbed the Bug Blaster build. This one is a pretty general use, kind of jack of all trades. They all kind of are, but this one specifically tries to handle a lot of things pretty well and doesn't really focus on one specific thing. So going through the build setup for the Bug Blaster build, for our weapons, our primary weapon we are using is the LAS Sickle. This is one of, in my opinion, the best weapons for the bugs. It is incredibly useful, high rate of fire. It's able to melt light armored enemies very quickly. And if you don't have access to this, something like the Killzone 2 SMG that we got from the crossover for free would also be a very good replacement. Or if you're watching this and somehow you didn't get access to it, if it's in the future and they stopped doing it, just the default Liberator even can work very well. It is a perfectly serviceable weapon. For secondary weapons, I'm using the Senator because it is a phenomenal secondary weapon. Just having pocket heavy armor penetration is just great. It's able to help you take out those difficult hive guards or even just chargers that are very low on health that you can finish off. But again, if you don't have access to that, the default Peacemaker can still work very well. And then for throwing grenades, I'm using the Thermites because they are phenomenal at taking out chargers or Bile Titans or anything really big that you just want to take out very quickly. But again, if you don't have access to those, something like the Impact Grenades would work phenomenally because they are great at A, breaking up groups, and B, they are phenomenal for closing bug holes. Then talking about armor, really, if you are going to be using the Sickle, the best thing that you want to pair with this is anything that uses the new Siege Ready passive. For me personally, I was using the Street Scout armor from the Urban Legends Warbond. But again, if you don't have access to that, especially since it's not a very common armor passive to have yet in the normal superstore outside of the Warbond, anything with Engineering Kit or Med Kit or even Democracy Protects would work perfectly fine, especially if you're not using the Sickle. If you are using the Liberator or the Killzone SMG, they have a lot more ammo in reserves, so you can kind of get away with using another one of those passives as well. And then talking about stratagems, we are using the Recoilless Rifle, the Eagle Strafing Run, the Orbital Rail Cannon, and the Flame Sentry, again from Urban Legends. But if you don't have access to that, the standard Gatling Sentry would work perfectly fine as well. And then the main strategy for this particular build is, again, you have a pretty good amount of coverage against essentially anything you can come up against. Light armored, numerous enemies, you have your primary weapon, your Strafing Run, and also your Gatling Sentry. A combination of those 3 things allow you to just cull through massive hordes of smaller enemies. The smaller hunters, the warriors, even brood commanders you can go through very quickly. And then you also have things in your pocket to handle those big tough enemies if you need it. The Recoilless Rifle allows you to quickly handle chargers that may come up against you, and even impalers that you might come up against, it can handle very well. And that's also why we have the Thermite Grenades, because in case we run out of recoilless shots, we also have those to fall back on. And then the Rail Cannon is another thing that we can have in our pocket that can take out something really big on the field very quickly. If you wanted to swap this out for something like the Orbital Laser, just to give you a little bit more flare and a little bit more area control, you could do that if you really wanted to, but this is just our pocket. There's a big thing on the field and we want to take it out and we don't have access to our recoilless rifle or our Thermite Grenades or whatever the case may be. You throw this and it takes out whatever you want to take out. And again, this build is very general use. It can handle just about anything that the bugs can throw at you. The only real thing that you might struggle with is Stalkers, but that's essentially what everybody struggles with because Stalkers are just horrible. They sneak up on you when you're least expecting it. And if you're trying to do a blitz mission where you are trying to close bug holes, you might then want to take out the Thermite Grenades and swap them out for the impacts, just so that way you have a better time closing the holes, because then you're not going to need really as much anti-tank capabilities any more than you already do, because you already have a pretty good amount of that. So then moving on to the second build. The second build is a little bit more of a meme build, but it is still very effective. This is what I like to call the Char Soldier build. And this is a build that I'm sure everybody has put together at least at one point in time during their career, and it is a pure flame build. It is a build that we are going to use to burn everything around us. So talking about the build, for your primary weapons, you could go with either the cookout shotgun, or the one that I chose to go with was the breaker incendiary, since they both have incendiary properties, and I just personally like the feel of the breaker incendiary very well. But again, if you don't have access to either one of these weapons or the war bonds that they come with, you could just go with, say, the breaker spray and pray if you did want to keep the basic feel of the breaker style weapon, or again, the basic default liberator would work fine as well. And then again, I'm using the senator as my secondary weapon because it's just phenomenal against the bugs, but the peacemaker or the redeemer would work very well. And then for throwables, I'm using incendiary grenades just to stay on theme, which maybe isn't the most efficient thing in the whole world because thermites or impacts would probably work out a lot better, but I gotta stay on theme, and that's what this whole entire build is about. But just know you could use either the thermites or impacts if you wanted to. And then for armor, really the only option for a build like this is anything that has the inflammable passive. I know that that might be a little bit difficult to come across if you don't have access to the war bond that provides it, but there are a couple of armor sets that you can get directly from the superstore, such as the I-92 Firefighter or the I-44 Salamander. You can get both of those directly from the superstore, and they have inflammable, and they would be very good. If you don't have access to any of that, or you just aren't able to get it, you can also use the AC2 Obedient armor from the Killzone 2 crossover that they gave to everybody for free, because while it doesn't necessarily protect against fire as much as inflammable, it still does reduce the amount of damage you take from it. But if you don't have access to any of that for whatever reason, anything with Medkit or Democracy Protects would also work very good. You just need to be a little bit more careful where you are if you're not using any armor set that reduces the amount of fire damage you take. And then for stratagems, I'm sure nobody's really going to be surprised at this, but we're using the Eagle Napalm Strike, the Orbital Napalm Barrage, the Flamethrower, and the Flame Sentry. And again, if you don't have access to the Flame Sentry because you don't have that war bond, you could use the Incendiary Mines and it would still work well and also keep you on theme, which is arguably more important. So I'm sure nobody's surprised at the strategy behind this particular build, which is just to burn everything. You basically have ways that you can burn essentially anything, either singularly or in massive groups. You use the Napalm Strike to take out approaching patrols. You use the Orbital Napalm Barrage to hit massive bug nests. And then you use the Flamethrower and the Flame Sentry or the Incendiary Mines to just handle anything that's close to you. And it is basically one of the more satisfying builds of the world. It can sometimes backfire, again, because it's fire. And even with the armor passive reducing the amount of damage you take, you still can accidentally take yourself out with your own flames. It doesn't happen nearly as often, but you still need to be a little bit careful. And like I said, this one is a little bit more of a meme-ish build, but it is still really effective when put in the right hands. Against big things like Bile Titans, you might struggle with a little bit because you just don't have really good ways to hit them. So in that sense, you might need to rely on your teammates a little bit, or maybe change a couple of small things. If you wanted to swap out the Eagle Napalm Strike for maybe the 110 rockets just to give you some single target capabilities that you can reliably use, that might not be a bad idea. But this build is all about theme and it's all about burning, and we do not want to sacrifice fire in any way. And then the last build that I have for you today is the one that I personally use pretty much the most when I go up against the bugs, and that is what I call the Chain Gunner build. This one is incredibly fun. It is really good at taking out the approaching swarms of enemies. It also has the ability to take out the bigger threats, but typically you kind of want to leave that to your teammates. And it is also just very satisfying to use. So first, talking about the weapons, for your primary, you kind of just want to use anything that has medium armor penetration, and the choice is kind of up to you. I personally went with the Plaz 101 Purifier just to add a little bit of explosive damage to it and give us a little bit of area of effect. But you could also go with something simple like the Slugger Shotgun, the Diligence Counter Sniper, or even just the Liberator Penetrator. Those would all work perfectly fine. So long as you have some form of medium armor punch, that's really all you're looking for. And again, I'm using the Senator as my secondary, but you could also go with the Peacemaker if you don't have access to it. And honestly, you could go with any grenade you want to use for this particular setup. I would say either the Thermites or the Impacts would work very well. The Thermites allow you to take out big targets, which admittedly you don't have nearly as much options to do that with this particular build, and the Impacts are just great for closing bug holes, as I mentioned before. And then for armor for this, I am basically using anything that has Engineering Kit, as it just allows us to have a little bit better recoil control, which in this setup is going to work really nicely and give us extra grenades. Personally, I'm using my favorite armor in the entire game as of right now, which is the CE67 Titan that you can get from the Superstore. This is a phenomenal armor set. It's light armor, but it also has a little bit more armor rating than most other light armors, and it comes with engineering kit, which is one of my favorite armor passives in the entire game. But you can use essentially anything with either engineering kit, or if you wanted to swap this out for med kit or even just extra padding, that would also work well. And for stratagems, we have a very tried and true simple combination. We have the Eagle Airstrike, the Orbital Rail Cannon, the Stalwart Light Machine Gun, and the Rover Guard Dog. This is what I like to call a very solid and classic stratagem loadout that I use a lot of the times when I go up against the bugs. The Eagle Airstrike is like a Swiss Army knife of utility. You can take out bug holes, you can take out groups, you can take out singular threats if you angle it right and if you're really good with it, and it is just a very generally useful Eagle stratagem to take. The Orbital Rail Cannon, as I said before, is your take out big thing on the field button. Its cooldown is very good, and it allows you to just single-handedly take out any Bile Titan or big charger that's coming towards you. Again, we don't really have super access to anything that is going to be able to handle those gigantic threats easily. If you take the Thermites and you're really good with throwing, yes, you can take them out, but the Thermites would more or less be used for the chargers and potentially even the impalers that are close to you. And with the combination of the Stalwart and the Rover Guard Dog, essentially any size swarm of light armored enemies are going to just get absolutely devastated. You and your Guard Dog working together, you are going to be able to just sit there and take out massive groups of enemies, and you'll see your kill counter just skyrocket. And that's essentially what this particular build is about. Is it's very satisfied to just sit there, hold down the trigger, hear your character laugh maniacally, and take out those gigantic groups of smaller threats that are coming towards you. Again, you might have to leave the really big threats to your allies if you don't have access to anything that can take them out at the current moment. Again, that's why we have the Orbital Rail Cannon strike. And again, you could swap this around if you wanted to change a couple of different things. If you wanted to take the normal machine gun instead of the Stalwart, that way you have a little bit more heavy armor penetration, that'd be perfectly fine. Or if you wanted to swap out the Eagle Airstrike for the strafing run just to give you a little bit more light enemy takedowns, that would also be pretty good. If you just want to go for full-blown ad control and then leave the big threats to your allies, that could also work out well. The main premise with this particular build is, again, you are going to be using the Stalwart basically like your primary weapon, and your primary weapon is going to be like your support weapon because you're going to bring it out when you have those difficult enemies that you just can't quite punch through with the light penetration that the Stalwart has. But ultimately, it is a very fun build. It is very satisfying, and although you have a couple of circumstances that you need a little bit of assistance in, it is still a very effective build nonetheless, just like the other ones we've talked about. And there you have 3 good builds that you can take up against the Terminids in Helldivers 2. I hope you guys like this. I hope you enjoyed this. I know it's a little bit different than what I normally do. Normally I do deep rock builds, so my first time doing any kind of a Helldiver build video, so let me know what you guys think, and if you have any other suggestions. Would you guys like to see bot builds next, or maybe Illuminate builds? Let me know what you guys think down in the comments, and if you have any other suggestions for other good builds or additions to the builds that I've talked about, let me know down in the comments as well. And as always, I hope you guys found this video informative and entertaining. If you did, please be sure to let me know by hitting that like button, and consider becoming a member and subscribing today, as it really helps me out a lot. For Super Earth Helldivers, I will see you in the next video.